we're talking about decarbonising our industrial future, which is, I think, a really huge and important topic. I think so often when we're thinking about climate change and net zero, we focus on the energy sector, but there's a whole kind of manufacturing sector out there as well. And, and SMEs are the backbone of our economy, and particularly in our industrial heartlands. So decarbonisation and repurposing of the industrial base towards net zero are absolutely crucial parts of a just transition. My name's Rebecca Bell. I'm a member of the SERA UK Executive. I'm also the chair of SERA Scotland. And full disclosure, in my day job, I work for the Carbon Capture and Storage Association. So industrial decarbonisation is really close to my heart. So I'm really delighted to have such a great panel here today. We've got Sarah Jones MP, new Shadow Minister for Industry and Decarbonisation. She has to leave us quite early, so Sarah, take it away.
Thank you very much. Can I just ask who was in the just before lunch SERA meeting? Only a couple, because I might just repeat the start of what I said before, because it's really important. And forgive me for leaving early. I have to go to Ed Miliband's speech. So my role is a new one created a few weeks ago to sit within the business team and the energy and net zero team. So I work with Johnny Reynolds and I work with Ed Miliband. And the point of that role is to understand and to try and coordinate the reality that if we want to deliver net zero, we have to do it through good jobs. And if we want to deliver good jobs, we have to take advantages that come with net zero. So the two need to go hand in hand. Now, hopefully some of you will have seen Rachel's speech this morning that was extraordinary, I thought, in its ambition and in its laser-like focus, as she said, on growing the economy in every part of the country so we can get Britain's future back. And this debate is at the heart of that agenda. And she spoke about it in her speech. Johnny Reynolds spoke about it in his speech, and Ed will do the same later. The starting point for all of this has to be an economy that is stabilised and secure, where there are no surprises. And that is absolutely at the heart of what Rachel is setting out to do. We can't carry on with a vacuum. Have plans that are updated and that move with the times and reflect where we need to be in the future. We cannot carry on with a national grid that goes to the places that we don't necessarily need it so much to go to anymore, and not the new places that we do. We cannot carry on with a system where there's £200 billion worth of investment waiting to be attached to the national grid, but it can't be because you have to wait for years. We cannot carry on with a system where the planning regime takes twice as long for big infrastructure projects as it did in the past, and people are just really struggling to get their projects moving forward. And we cannot carry on with a system where the public are expected to sort of be buffeted with what the courts and the inspectorates say, and there isn't a national plan and there isn't a national policy. And that is what Labour want to deliver. So the question of how industries decarbonise is obviously the most important and central question for the next decade. And our ambitious plans through the Green Prosperity Plan that you will all, I'm sure, know about, the £28 billion from the middle of the Parliament Wealth Fund, where we will bring in public sector funding, but matched and indeed increased by private sector investment. So Rachel has said for £1 spent from the public sector, we want £3 spent from the private sector to invest in all of the energy and the industry that we need in the future. Now, of course, there will be different solutions for different sectors. There is no one size fits all here. And Johnny talked this morning about the automotive industry, and we know how destabilizing it has been recently, where the government have set a target for 2030 and then changed the target. And we heard from the sector and from sectors beyond that the stability that you need from government is just not there. So Johnny's commitment this morning to the automotive sector, just as an example, was to never take it for granted, to use the money that we have to make sure we have battery factories, 8 battery factories across the country, to make sure we have a reliable charging network, which we know is a vital part of infrastructure that is just falling way behind. There are more chargers in Westminster than there are in the whole of the north of England, so I'm told. And that will create 80,000 more high-skilled jobs. So that's just one example. And another is, of course, the steel industry. And my colleague at the end will talk about that later. But we want to be on the side of all of these industries. We have talked to the steel industry. Of course, we've seen the government putting in £500 million worth of investment, but only for several thousand people to lose their jobs. And, you know, we stand with community to call on the government to talk to the unions, to talk to them about what's needed and what we need to do over the coming months and years, and what Labour wants that we need in this country. And we've got a £3 billion pot that we have put aside just for that, which will be very important. All those high energy intensive businesses in our supply chains, we need to take them with us too. Finally, and I could go through all the sectors, but I won't. But in terms of skills, because I was asked to talk briefly about skills, there's this huge challenge of how do we make sure we're using the skills that we need in the future. And we've had announcements this week on that. We've already said when it comes to apprenticeships and the apprenticeship levy, that doesn't work. We're over £1 billion that hasn't been spent from the government budget, and it needs to be much more flexible and respond to what business say. But we've also announced this week about transforming our FE colleges into specialist technical excellence colleges, which is the idea behind it is to fit skills to the local area and the local businesses, so they match what we need. And the idea is that you work with local government, you work with local business, you work with local universities to work hand in hand to develop the programs that we need to make sure we've got the skills that we need at a local level. And then Skills England will assess that at a national level to make sure it fits with our national plan going forward. So this is at the heart of Rachel's agenda. It's at the heart of Johnny's and Ed's. It's a really big part of how we will give Britain its future back. It's really complicated, as I am finding 5 weeks into the job. Every single conversation I have is like, well, that's interesting. I don't know about cement. I need to learn about that. And of course, you know, there are great experts who are helping us manufacturers across the country, because I was just given a stat from the TUC that 800,000 jobs potentially could go offshore if we don't get this right, and what a catastrophe that would be for this country with all its skills and talent. So we stand ready to work with business, with the trade union colleagues and with others to make sure we're providing the jobs for the future, providing the right energy for the future, and making sure our businesses and our good jobs can grow across the country. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So thank you so much, and it's really great to kind of hear what Labour's got planning and all the announcements that have been coming out. We've got representatives from a few sectors on the panel today. But before we go to them, we're going to ask Robin from WMG to give a bit more of an overview of the work that they're doing across sectors, and then we'll take a few questions.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. First of all, I'd like to thank SERA and Palace Yard for putting on this very important discussion. A quick introduction. My name's Professor Robin Clark. I'm the Dean and Managing Director of WMG at the University of Warwick. WMG, some of you may know as Warwick Manufacturing Group. You might be sitting there wondering why a university professor is perhaps speaking to you about industrial decarbonisation. Well, I'm an engineer working at Rolls-Royce, And then I spent several years of my career working in the rail industry, both in the UK and in the US. So I've seen a mix of private and public, large and small, UK and non-UK business workings. And WMG, where I work now, isn't a typical university department. If you know anything about us, you'll know we're focused on applying innovative science and engineering to business, and on giving people the green and digital skills to succeed in the economy of the future. We're working with industry, from steel to tech startups, from materials to logistics, all focused on delivering our transition to net zero. Today, manufacturing is statistically responsible for 10% of UK emissions, but it's at the heart, if you think about it, of what we need to change. Whether we're talking about the blades for power, wind turbines, to the motors and batteries that'll move the vehicles that we need and store our energy, or to the steels and materials that we use to build the infrastructure around us. But I want to just take a few minutes today to talk to you about what it'll take practically for our industrial sector to decarbonise. And I think you can break it down into 4 key areas of progress. Initially, investment, making sure we have the scale of public sector and private infrastructure to business capital investment. And those of you that were in this room yesterday evening will have heard a lot of talk about that. Innovation, focusing on the scientific and technical breakthroughs we need in everything from advanced battery chemistries to grid storage to advanced materials and connected green transport. And I'll just give you an example here. I'd like to applaud the foresight of Coventry City Council, who we've been working with over the last few years, especially Councillor Jim O'Boyle, in considering train and track solution to the light rail system in Coventry as a city. We think about application, getting green technologies to market at scale. And that means our charging networks, recycling capability, grid connections, net zero public transport, and local power networks. And critically and finally, skills, because we won't be able to do any of the above without people with the right skills at the right time in the right place. And in each of those areas, we need a partnership between the public sector, whether that's institutions like WMG, enablers like the catapults, or funding bodies like Innovate UK, and of course, national, regional, and local government, partnering with the private sector. If we can do that, then we will have the opportunity to realise the changes in business that are so needed. Now, the good news, I think, is that we know we can make the changes that we need. We have some excellent examples to build on. Now, I know this from my work in WMG, but beyond WMG, there are other local SME by getting perhaps one of our graduates to work with them. And I'll give you an example there. An enamelling specialist called Kingfisher, a graduate working with them was able to help them to recover waste heat from the furnace power in their drying room. And that equated to a saving of 23,000 kilos of carbon per year and saved them £11,000 on their energy bill. Just think if we multiply that up. Or working with the steel sector to find ways to use more scrap steel as a source material for greener production. Or developing modular part-time courses with FE colleges and employers to give people the skills they need to secure a career in battery manufacturing or electric motors while staying in their current roles. We know we have the solutions we need and the talent to get them to market. But the bad news, I think, is that we need to do much more than we are doing today. While the increase in the science and innovation budget is welcome, the truth is the researchers and innovators need to focus their efforts on how best to use that money in order to deliver on the decarbonisation agenda. For smaller businesses, The withdrawal of the ERDF funding is having a real impact on support for business transition. We're losing the ability to help businesses change their energy consumption. There are skills, part-time learning, and lifelong loan entitlements, but there's very little clarity on how we will actually be delivering those. So my plea to policymakers is to grasp the scale of the opportunity, make the most of the programs we know work and learn from them to scale them up, and ensure we build partnerships between the public and private sector to deliver the change we need. Let's simplify the landscape, share, connect, and scale. We need to do all of this, though, with a renewed sense of urgency. And we all need to own the challenges in our heads, in our hearts, and in our actions. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Robin. And I should say thank you to WMG for sponsoring this session as well. And I think it's really great to hear that the innovation that's not just in what we're doing, but how we're doing it. And that's absolutely crucial, I think. So have we got, before we move on and before we lose Sarah, have we got any questions from the floor? This chap here. There should be a microphone. Where are we? Oh, chap in the red t-shirt, and then gentleman there as well. Gentleman.
Thank you. Thank you. I was at the CND Fringe yesterday, and their strapline was wages, not weapons, and they identified the £300 billion earmarked for weapons of mass destruction. Wouldn't that money be better poured into an initiative like this, which is about the most important crisis of all, and that's saving the planet?
Thanks.
Thank you. Robert McElveen from the Mineral Products Association. So we represent manufacturers of things like cement and concrete. The EU's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism started the initial phase last week and starts charging in 2026, when you will probably be a minister. Will Labour, if the Tories don't deliver a UK CBAM, will Labour be able to deliver it with a sense of urgency? Because otherwise there's going to be a huge challenge for energy-intensive industries, including steel, as well as cement.
Thanks very much, Sarah.
Yes, can I also thank WMG and SERA for putting this on. One of the things that many people have said to me is you need to talk to WMG, go and see you. Here a kind of very simple 4-point plan, which I've written down, and the examples as well, which are very powerful in terms of what getting good people into good jobs can deliver across the board. I think in terms of the first question, we need to we shouldn't think about things in terms of either or. We need to defend our country, keep our country safe. That's the number one priority for any sensible government, but the challenge we've got now in terms of whether it's nuclear, whether it's renewables, whether it's the manufacturing sector, is that we have a government that has for 13 years completely failed to support those industries, completely failed to support individuals, and we have higher taxes and lower wages than we had when we started, and nothing has got better in the last 13 years. That is the major challenge we need to overcome, and if we can overcome that challenge and set out with a plan which puts working people at the heart of everything we do, I think we will deliver far more. On cement and associated industries, I'm not going to try and answer that question. I have had previously in the last meeting a question similarly, and I am very keen to have these conversations. I am acutely aware of the need to make sure energy intensive industries are supported, that we don't lose jobs abroad, that we keep them here, that we keep those supply chains in this country, and I am keen to talk to you about how we do that.
Thank you so much. Does anyone else on the panel want to?
Could I just say about the CBAM, because obviously I was really pleased that you raised that. I would have raised it in my contribution. That is absolutely critical. We have been campaigning for the CBAM. We attended the NPF process in Nottingham and spoke with Ed and John in particular, and that was one of the issues that we pressed really hard on, and I'm pleased to say we've got a commitment from Labour that will be in the manifesto. Clearly, the EU are going to introduce it from 2026. If we did not have our version of CBAM, which is a cross-border adjustment mechanism, we will be vulnerable, we will be open and exposed, and steel that would have gone into Europe would almost certainly have found its way into the UK. So just to say, my understanding is we have a firm commitment from Labour that will be delivered.
Yes, no, we absolutely do. I don't want to pretend that I know everything about the complications with that, and very pleased to talk. Thanks, Roy.
Thanks both of you. Well, Roy, I was going to come to you next. We've talked to the kind of wider.
I thought I'd done my bit on CBAM. Is that?
Thanks very much. It's been great.
No. Well, look, I mean, my union represents workers in the steel industry, as you probably know, but not just in the steel industry. We represent people on wider manufacturing and certainly within SMEs. I think we are crying out for help. We're crying out for an industrial strategy. Theresa May and Greg Clark, it seems a lifetime ago. But in fairness, it was doing some good work. It was looking at the areas that needed to be sort of identified, and then they did away with it. And I think that was a political decision, and the Industrial Strategy Council was disbanded. It's pleasing to see, and I hope it is a priority for Labour when we win the election, that we do put focus back on an industrial strategy, because it's what manufacturers and industry is crying out for. How we tie up all those supply chains, and how we get the manufacturing sector sort of increased again from where it is at a pretty low ebb. But turning specifically to steel, you've probably all seen the recent announcements. I think it's shocking, and I don't care mind saying that. I think the issue around the so-called deal that's been announced between the government and Tata Steel is short-sighted. I think it's been done purely on the basis of cost, and that was always our fear as trade unions, is that we wouldn't be making long-term decisions based on what's right for the country and what the needs are of our country and the workforce and the areas that industry is focused. We would be making decisions based on cost, and that's what they've done, and that's clearly what has happened there. And we need to make our feelings known, and we need to make our representations, and we will put forward our alternatives to the plan, and we hope that the possible alternatives, looking at all of the technologies that may be available now, but also may be developed in the future. Because one thing is that we're not there with some of these technologies. We have fallen behind. We've seen other countries have moved at a faster pace. I think at times we don't give the priority and the focus or the urgency on issues that we should. So I think we are behind the curve on a lot of these issues, but we need to play catch up pretty soon. So there are ways that we can decarb, and we have to. We're not dinosaurs. We're not, burying our head in the sand. All of my members get the fact that we have to do this, and we also probably get the fact that there's going to be some pain along the way, and that's inevitable almost. But there's ways that you can do it that will mitigate some of that, and there's technologies that can be introduced that help us to make all of the grades of steel that the country needs. The electric arc furnace on its own is not the answer. It is not the answer. People think steel is steel. Well, there are hundreds of different grades and properties and types of steel, And at the moment, an electric arc furnace cannot make all of those grades of steel. We heard this morning emphasis on automotive. Well, an electric arc furnace cannot make steel for a fully finished automotive sector. So that means that we're going to import that steel. How on earth is that helping the planet? How on earth is that helping the climate when we close down production in places like Port Talbot and we import it from India or from China or from elsewhere? An electric arc furnace cannot make the grade of steel for our tin plate industry, which is along the coast in South Wales at Connethley and Trostre, where we employ almost 1,000 people making tin plate for our food industry, for our beverages. And during the pandemic, those workers were classed as key workers. They were keeping, the food industry going. And now they face the risk of being thrown on a scrap heap because we cannot make, or we won't be able to make that steel in this country. So we think it's short-sighted. We have to have the capacity in this country to make all grades of steel to supply all the needs of the UK, and that can be done. It can be done, and we're prepared to have the discussions with the government and with companies as to how we. Working people should not pay the price for the transition.
Thanks very much, Roy. And yeah, absolutely crucial. This idea that we can't just be outsourcing our emissions to other countries, and we can't be losing our jobs as part of the movement to net zero and to industrial decarbonisation. So we've heard some of the issues. I think we're going to move on to a couple of organisations that are perhaps suggesting some solutions. Not that I'm suggesting anyone else isn't suggesting solutions, but So I'd like to ask Sarah Hunter from Aria to say a few words.
Sure, thanks. So hi, I'm Sarah. For those of you who don't know Aria, it's the government's newest funding agency for breakthrough science and technology, the Advanced Research and Innovation Agency. And I'm on the board there. But before that, I was at Google for many years working with a lot of climate tech startups. And that's really my perspective on this issue is I've spent the last 10 years working closely with relatively new small-scale science entrepreneurs, really, who are coming up with lots of new solutions for the decarbonisation challenge. Some of them are direct-to-consumer solutions, but most of them actually are in the industrialisation space. I think where we started, there's been a very myopic look at just the energy sector when we look at decarbonisation. Actually, a lot of the innovation around industrial sectors, around agriculture, have been ignored, frankly. And so I work with scientists and engineers who are trained really to see gaps. Where are people not looking at new solutions? And it's an incredibly exciting sector. So from that perspective, I guess I'd say a couple of things. Number one, I think we forget that decarbonisation, it's not just going to be replacing one type of energy with another. It's not just going to be replacing one type of car with an electric car. Everything is cities. They're going to change how we park. There are all kinds of sort of additional domino effects, if you like, when you think about decarbonising our entire society. And that is where the startup community is being very creative and coming up with new solutions. So I'd encourage everyone not just to think about how our industries look today, how UK jobs look today, but actually to think about how it's going to be transformed for tomorrow. The second thing is, and I think this was already touched on when we talked about steel, this is a massive geopolitical race. The US have introduced the Inflation Reduction Act, which is the most enormous investment by the US federal government in these new climate industries, because not just because they need to decarbonize their country, but because they see these as export and growth opportunities for the future. And it is crazy to me that the Conservative government has not leapt on this bandwagon already. It's just the biggest opportunity ever in terms of a new economy. And similarly, China has also put a lot of money and investment behind these new industries. So we are naive if we don't think things like the carbon border adjustment mechanism are going to be part of this. We need to step up our serious take on how to make these We need to have startups work with corporates more on these solutions. You know, the startups are often software engineers who frankly do not think like hardware engineers. There's a totally different set of skills and solutions they bring to this, but they cannot decarbonize, you know, supply chains. They can't decarbonize steel factories without actually integrating closely with the corporates who are doing this on the ground. So the more a government, the more universities can create those environments where corporates partner with the creative innovators, bringing tools like AI to these solutions, the quicker we're going to be able to actually provide some solutions to the problems that we all see. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And I think thinking of solutions and innovation, we'll move straight on to Jason Longhurst from Prologis, a logistics company, but now one that's moving into energy, renewable energy generation and energy storage.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, a logistics company. Probably most people haven't heard of us, so we are probably the largest global logistics company on every continent we operate. So we are a US-based company. However, I wouldn't say we're about to, but going to Robin's points, we've been heavily focused, probably from 2006, on probably those 4 critical areas. So we already invest significantly in net zero. So we have been delivering logistics sites that are net zero from commitment. It's about creating the right assets, the right stock, and the right impact that we wanted to have as a global company. The innovation side, I think that continues to push everyone, and we've invested very heavily in that, looking at elements like solar. So the next person, please don't come up to me and ask the question of, have you thought about solar on your roofs? It's a default. As a business, I think 18 months, 2 years ago in the US, and possibly it's something that we look at in terms of the application of Aria in the US, is we move from not being in the energy business to being the second largest solar provider from rooftop. So we are prepared to innovate, we're prepared to invest. The other aspect, and I'll keep going with your 4 points, which is application. We have a 2040 commitment that we'll apply that across every aspect of the business. So achieving net zero isn't a commercial do we, don't we? We've already invested in it because it's good for our customers. It's good for what we need to deliver. And you know, one word that people keep skipping is, you know, sustainability is investable. So you do need things, you know, a clear industrial strategy. You do need the confidence to invest. And I think, you know, organisations like ours, you know, the UK Arm is circa 6 to 7 billion in the UK. The impact that can have on energy in terms of solar production. We're looking at battery storage. We're already predicting and planning for how you would. How does that fit into one of your biggest and most critical infrastructure platforms that, you know, put your hand up if you don't deliver something online? Okay, you will need logistics and you will need that to be sustainable, and it's part of your critical offer. The final bit of skills, we apply that both of how we think, but also how we provide that. How they actually think. It's probably one of the biggest demands, which is, you know, what everyone's touched on, is how do you keep applying this? This isn't a one-off solution. It's part of that, you know, I would call it smart construction at one end of it, right through to application. So that's roughly what we do.
Brilliant, thank you so much. And now that we've heard from the panel, I'm shortly going to open up to questions, but I'm going to take the chair's privilege and ask one of my own first. In your view, how can innovators and industrialists best inform, invest, and collaborate in driving forward on a net zero future?
This is a massive question.
Quickly.
Exactly, sure.
Is that one to mull over maybe while we...
I'll dive in. We've touched on it. Innovation is just the default collaboration. We are going to keep on having to deliver, and that's why I use the word smart construction. If we can apply that to something like logistics sector, where we can construct and deliver a net zero from 2006, then, you know, for me, it's about raising the bar. So that's where the collaboration is, that should be across, that should be the minimum. And I think that's the thing we keep pushing is It is about innovation. It's about applying it back into the business. So Prologis is very clear on that commitment. I think it's also that innovation you bring globally. I think there's a lot we should be drawing, and we should be world leaders in it.
I'm not a great supporter of government doing everything, but I think there is a role there for government to try and create the environment and the right sort of investment opportunities for innovators and for investors to do that. And I don't know whether that's in some way encouraging R&D. I think as a country, we fell well behind in terms of what we invested in R&D for a long time. When we were in the European Union, we were pretty near of our GDP we reinvested in R&D. So I think there's a role there somewhere to try and create that environment that people will do that and will see that as a long-term sort of prospect and sustainability. What we're seeing, unfortunately, is a lot of talented people, and I mean really talented people, you know, the innovators, the engineers, the technical people who are leaving our industry because they don't see that long-term future in that industry. So if we don't somehow turn that around and give them the confidence that there is a future there, then we won't attract those people who are going to do that innovation and that investment in the first place.
And Robin and Sarah, that seems like an invitation to you to to get those people in. Right, let's open it up to the floor then. If we've got any questions, yeah, lady there, please. And I'll take a couple. So yeah.
Hi, Faye McAnullah from the Energy Research Accelerator, which is a collaboration of universities in the Midlands. My question is really probably aimed at Sarah and Robin, and it's about the research funding landscape. I spend a lot of my time working to work with industry. I wonder, obviously you've come in with Aria, which is a great new kind of innovation into the sector. And I heard Robin speak about ERDF and the loss of that. I wonder what you think needs to change in the research funding landscape to improve collaboration and activity, perhaps under the next government.
That's an excellent question. Thank you. And lady here in the brown dress.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Sophia Hayward. I'm from a sustainable fuel producer called Dimeter. I'm really interested on the points that you were mentioning around steel, and there's no one size fits all approach. We all kind of recognise that. But for policy at the moment, there aren't real kind of clear drivers as how we try to drive investment into that wide range of solutions. We're quite good at focusing on one thing or another, but actually we need so much more than that. So I'd be really interested in the panel's perspectives on what kind of policies do we need and should have, both in the short term and the kind of medium long term.
Brilliant, thank you. So I'll go to Sarah.
Yeah, I would link the two. Small scale innovators, scientists coming out of universities often who have amazing ideas, may have had access to a lab within a university setting, but actually don't have the funding for that longer term pilot, that sort of bridge funding to actually do the pilot phase. So actually I would push a lot more decision making down to a region level, make funding much quicker. I think there's much more room for experimentation with research funding, where actually using lotteries to give away money, or having much quicker turnarounds for distribution of money. I think this government has been incredibly unimaginative about how you distribute research money, because actually I think the answers for all of these things are in the local innovators. I don't think any government is going to come up with the answer, and I'm afraid I think most corporates won't come up with the answers either. I think it's actually about small scale new innovators. And so I think the quicker we can get money down to them, and money that is of the scale you need to actually do these sort of hardware and software combined solutions, the better.
Thanks. And Robin, presumably as a recipient of research funding in your career.
I wouldn't disagree with what you said at all there, Sarah. If I look at the amount of time that my colleagues spend preparing bids for funding, research funding, and then I think about the amount of time they could actually be doing useful research innovation work. It's very clear to me that the landscape that we're operating in at the moment is not helping us by any stretch of the imagination. So I think speed, I think, you know, simplicity and clarity, just as a community actually articulating what it is we need to do. And then really, I think a more collaborative rather than competitive research landscape is an example of where perhaps we have looked at that funding landscape and got a good mix, because as a centre of the high value manufacturing catapult, we get funding from that. We compete EPSRC, Innovate UK funding, but also there's the direct contract research. Because the work that we do is applied, we're actually working very closely with industry as well. And that three-way model actually works really well in de-risking the whole situation. But speed of response, speed of getting the money, more collaborative ways of doing things have to be the key points, I think, for me.
Thank you. And down that end, are there any sort of...
Well, just on the policies, I think we worked very well in a partnership with UK Steel, which is the Employers Association, because at the end of the day, we have the same aim, we have the same goal to create a sustainable industry. And we'd put together a document a few years ago now, which was kind of the asks of government that the industry needed. And they haven't really changed. So after we talk about CBAM, when I was attending UK Steel meetings, I was told I was not allowed to be in a meeting with a government official or minister without mentioning energy. So everywhere we went, we had to mention, what are you going to do about energy costs? And it is, you know, seriously, probably the biggest issue that we face as manufacturers. And even if we move to this, as we move forward to net zero and accepting that an electric arc furnace is going to be part of the solution, then that's even more critical to us now, is energy costs. So I don't know whether that fits with your question about what policies we need, but we need a government that's going to try and get energy. Our industry pays so much more for our energy than our competitors in Europe. So that's probably the one big issue that we need to sort of tackle, and whether we look at policies around that, and the cost of energy, but also the availability and the grid. We see in Prologis they don't actually have the capacity to support an electric arc furnace. So we've got this great plan for an electric arc furnace, which, unless there is serious investment in the grid, it's not going to work.
Just from our perspective, I think we need to start seeing policy as enabler. If you look in the US at what Aria has done to a sector very quickly, it gives you those four principles that we talked about earlier. But critically, if you look at the solar market in the UK, if you want to apply that and address the energy again, it's not massive amount of policy. This is about refinement. And I think it's the critical bit you got here. It's getting the mix of public, private, third sector collaborating. If you can do that, you can move at pace. Policy, we talk about it as almost as a stick rather than an enabling activity. So if we can do that and beg, borrow, steal and innovate, then that's what we would expect. And we see it globally in terms of how you can apply a solar solution, how you can fit energy into that in terms of battery, how that has a knock-on effect to how you look at your construction. So I think it's the drop the deficit mentality with it and use it as an enabling tool.
Thank you. And I think the message about collaboration on earlier ones as well. Have we got any more questions? Okay, chap there in the blue jacket, and then gentleman in the front row.
Hi, thank you. Michael Drury from UK Atomics. We're a molten salt reactor developer. Sarah mentioned looking beyond today's industries and deployment. Robin talked about ensuring partnerships with the industry. We're creating low carbon, low cost, £20 per megawatt, high quality heat for industrial applications. With our technology, the deployment of nuclear would be very different because we've got autonomous system and it's 40-foot ISO container that will go right next to industry. That's quite different from what we see today with nuclear and baseload electricity. What do you see as the major challenge for nuclear energy to industry where grid is not required, but heat is essential?
Okay, one to mull on there, and yep.
Hi, Ian Hibbett from BOC. Two quick questions. What in 2 years' time, what price will carbon be, and what price should carbon be?
Right. So Nali wants to get into that.
On nuclear, I don't know enough about your actual model, but from what I understand, the big challenge is actually a timeline one, which is, you know, it takes so long to get the kind of necessary safety and planning and local community engagement, right? That by the time you have energy transition. So I think if there's a way that you can make that process shorter and get to sort of actual working scale prototype quicker, then I think those sort of solutions can be part of the mix. I think the challenge is, you know, if you wait 15 years, we're going to be a lot further down the road of offshore wind and all the other solutions that people are talking about. I think price on carbon, it's funny, price on carbon is one of those things that a lot of people think is like the golden bullet, silver bullet, on stimulating the right kind of innovation around climate solutions. And I almost think it's the wrong tool to look at. I think it's lovely in theory, but I just think in practice, a global carbon, we're never going to get there. I would rather have policies that are national and targeted at the actual kind of local circumstances we need to change, rather than trying to go into sort of gas. I spent a lot of time at the UN. It's not a place where solutions happen. So I just think let's not try for global things. Let's try and get much more local and actually get the innovation happening very regionally to then become a sort of model for global solutions.
I'm afraid I'm the same. I'm not going to profess to know that much about the question that you've asked, other than just to say, yeah, we need to look at everything. We need to look at every opportunity to reduce energy costs, and I know nuclear and the smaller compact units are that much about the question. Carbon pricing is interesting because I think, and correct me if I get this wrong, because you may already know, it's about £70 a tonne now, give or take. It's only going to go up. I can't guess where it's going to be in 2 years, but it's probably only going to increase, and plans to increase it already. My point on that is and again, I haven't got the exact figures, but not every steel producer pays it. It's the most unfair tax that you can imagine. I think the last I heard was about only 10% of steel producers actually pay the carbon levy. Most of them don't. They avoid it, or it's not applied. So my point is, like a lot of things, whatever the price is, as long as it's applied fairly and everybody pays it, that's what CBAM's about as well, then we can compete. I'll put our industry against any other industry any day of the week. But we are unfairly, sort of hindered by these type of taxes. And we're, again, to coin a phrase, fighting with one hand tied behind our back, because not everybody pays that carbon tax adjustment in the steel industry, which is totally unfair. It's not a level playing field, is it?
Robin, okay. Have we got any more questions? If there's nothing immediately, then I'm going to pose one to the whole panel. So it's a shame that we've lost SERA, but in creating a Minister for Industry and Decarbonisation, Labour's clearly recognised the centrality of this challenge. So the question is, how can we get it right this time? I'm going to start at the end with one.
Well, for me, it's got to be joined up. I've been in too many meetings with this government where the left and the right, and they don't even talk to each other, let alone know what they're doing. You meet Bays and they say yes, and then they come back a few days later and say Treasury says no. So it's about joined up government. It's about making sure that the people that can make the decisions are in the room and you can have a sensible conversation with them. But in terms of what you've said, my final point would be it's got to be linked to a deliverable industrial strategy.
Thank you. Spot on.
From our perspective, I think it's about being investable. So I agree on the industrial strategy. Perhaps we need to be a bit more strategic in that and look at a sustainability strategy. So we do look at a global market context of that, where we should be world leaders. So I think it's still down the same theme, but let's be a little braver.
I would push much more decision making down to a regional level. I think the days of Whitehall being where the right sort of totality of the big vision happens, it just doesn't work anymore. So much more regional authority, much more regional funding, and letting regions decide how to spend their decarbonisation budgets better.
And Robin?
I wouldn't disagree with anything that's been said. I think we've got a lot of really good things happening, but if we connect, as Roy says, and we actually create the right environment for them to thrive, I think we'll be heading in the right direction. So it's good to see the joined up nature of the two parts of government. But I also think, and what worries me more than anything else at the moment is something I said when I spoke at the beginning, and that is we've really got to own this. This is urgent. And we talk about it and we do lots of things that we think are heading in the right direction. But I think we can't be any more. It's just going to sort itself out. This is serious and we need to really embrace that.
Thank you. And that's an important call to action. I think, am I seeing any more hands in the room? Yes, gentleman there.
Concrete. 8% of the world's CO2 is concrete. It's possible to build in engineered timber. We could replace huge amounts of construction with engineered timber. People like to live in engineered timbered buildings. They exist in the UK. The UK has more tall timber buildings than any other place on the planet. How do we go about embracing timber instead of dirty concrete? Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. And I'm not sure we've got any building materials / specialists on the panel, but there is one in the audience if you want to talk to the Mineral Products Association. Has anyone got any kind of thoughts on this? Or okay, that might be one for a kind of side chat afterwards then. Well, I think with that, I will wrap up. Rickhuss from Community Union, Jason Longhurst from Prologis, and apologies if I've been saying that wrong all the way through. Sarah Hunter from Aria, and Robin Clark from WMG, and thank you to WMG from Palace Yard for supporting this. Thank you very much. Thank you.